This podcast is brought to you by Trivelo Coaching, where we help triathletes and cyclists like you train smarter to race faster. I'm your host, Jordan Donnelly, and on my left is former Australian Ironman Champion and head coach of Trivelo Coaching, Gerard Donnelly. In today's episode, we have an issue with power and power meters, and we're going to explain what it is and what our current issue is and what you need to be careful of. But before we do that, we've got all our normal segments coming up, and there's so much to talk about this week with the Olympics coming up, the Tour de France. There is so much happening, and we have a lot to say. And if you're watching this on video, you'll notice that we are filming this from a very different location to normal, and so we're going to explain where we are and what we're doing. So, Dad, welcome back to another episode. Let's go with our normal starting segment. What are you grateful for?
Thanks, Jord. Well, it's been just one of the most amazing couple of weeks, I reckon, for a long time. Starting with, as we said on the last podcast, with Mum's passing and getting through the funeral and all of that that goes with that, which was a fantastic period, even though it was a sad occasion. And I think I got really sick and run down and happened to get COVID in the middle of that. Sometimes you get sick and run down because you're stressed for some reasons. So my gratitude is with every hard period that you go through, like where we are now, we've been planning on this trip to go to Italy to ride the Dolomites and the Italian Alps. And I've been looking forward to doing this for years. And we had planned this about 6 months ago with my nephew's wedding, your cousin getting married in Italy. And so that's the gratitude, is that, grateful to have an opportunity to travel, even though there's a lot happening in our lives, and some not so good, some fantastic. And the gratitude is that, you know, with everything that happens, you've just got to keep going continuously along that journey and look for the positives. And here we are. Feels surreal to be, just burying your mum and then you're having a holiday. It doesn't sound right, but that's actually what you should do, is move on. And we've celebrated her life, and now we're enjoying a really fantastic period of riding with yourself and another really good friend, Tim Jamison, who's been on the podcast, who's an exceptionally good rider. I must say I'm getting tailed up on every single climb that we go to. I'm getting a lesson on climbing, and it's just great training, great to be at altitude. We're currently at 1,400 meters in a little town just at the base of the Dolomites, which is just beautiful. And my gratitude is for these opportunities that come to be able to grab them and enjoy yourself. It's an unreal experience, and really grateful.
Yeah, my gratitude is going to be so it's the same thing. I'm so grateful to be here, but my story of getting here was just as tumultuous, and I'm even more grateful to be here because it looked for a second I probably wasn't going to be able to come or ride. I actually, a week before coming, was in a crash in a crit race, and just one of those, I'm going to say, unlucky incidents, although I was a bit annoyed with some of the riders in the race, but that's a whole different story. But I crashed pretty bad. It was quite a quick race, this quit race, and around the corner, and I was really looking at some of the guys taking these corners and wasn't too stoked with their lines. And sure enough, half hour in, 2 guys came down in front, and then a bunch of us just came down behind. It was quite a hectic crash, and I luckily walked away with just some scratches and nothing broken. One guy broke his leg, which was hard to see, and my bike was wrecked. And I was overseas at this point already, and I was meeting you in Italy. And that night, I was in a lot of pain, although nothing was broken, and the bike was wrecked. And I was sort of thinking, geez, I've just ruined the trip to Italy. Don't have a bike. Don't know if I'm going to be able to ride. And I kind of had the night to have a moment. And then I woke up the next morning feeling very grateful that I was like, oh, actually, nothing's wrong. I've just got a bunch of scratches. I'll still be able to ride, but I still had no bike. And this is going to be a big shout out to our sponsors, Giant, who came in, swooped in and saved the day, and immediately helped get me a replacement bike, helped make sure I got a bike in Italy, and I arrived here, got the brand new bike, and I'm able to ride this epic trip, which we've been looking forward to for so long. Really a bucket list item to ride these Alps on on this giant bike. So again, a very wild story to get here, but by the time I got here, I felt okay, and it was straight uphill.
Yeah, so I think it's a great story of how Giant have really looked after us over the years, and we're so grateful for that. We were leaving that night, and you only really told me that you crashed that morning, and for them to organise a bike, knowing that it had to be done that day, it was exceptional circumstances because we were leaving that day, and there was no other way of getting the bike to you because your mum and I were leaving, and they were able to make that bike happen in one day, get it built and deliver it to our house, and took it with us to the airport. Mum is now carrying a bike that was supposedly she was riding. But yeah, what a great story of people who just go out of their way to make things happen when the circumstances seemed like you were going to be without a bike for literally the whole tour that we were away for.
Yeah. Look, huge shout out to Darren and Dave Ross from Giant. Like as always, whenever anyone kind of needs support, they're the first to put their hand up and help out someone out in the Giant family. So that's why they're huge sponsors of ours, and why we love their support so much. Talking about unwritten rules, and I kind of alluded to it in the gratitude a little bit, but one unwritten rule definitely in crit racing is you cannot undercut people around a corner. And this was quite a high-speed race. We were averaging 50 k's an hour, so a lot faster in the straights and then losing some speed into the corners. And there was a lot of undercutting going on, and guys taking some decent risks. It was a really young race. It was all young guys, and I would like to say that I'm not afraid of taking risks on the bike and maybe push a little bit too far sometimes. But I was looking at some of these. Some of the decisions from athletes and going, geez, that is risky, and someone could crash, and sure enough, a crash happened. And I think this circuit is known for its crashes because they had an ambulance on each corner, which you don't see at most crit races. But this is that is an unwritten rule to not undercut around corners.
It is, and it's a really cheap way to gain some advantage up the bunch. But it's the most dangerous way. If you've got your line and someone comes underneath you, it's really a really dangerous thing to do. And you need to be able to pass people where it's straight line, and undercutting in the corner. Yeah, there's no rule that says you can't do it, but it's just the most dangerous thing you can possibly do for you and for the person that you're undercutting under. So yeah, it's you need to actually man up and improve your position in the bunch in the sections where it's least dangerous, and sometimes that's the hardest time. It's easy to duck in underneath people, but it just causes chaos.
Yeah, which it absolutely did. But that's not why we bring up the unwritten rule. The reason we bring it up is that we have our own unwritten rule on the podcast, and that's if you love the podcast and if you get some value out of it, the best thing you can do for us is share it to anyone in your network that might find it valuable, or share it on your social network. So share it to your social media, and we appreciate anyone that tags us online and shares an episode. It really does help us, and we see that, and we thank you. So I was very in all that. I was very grateful to walk away pretty spot free. Just took a bit of healing for a week, and again, just weird timing. It's lucky I crashed in that 24 hours, because if it was 24 hours later, there was just no way of getting a bike to you to get to me. I just would have been without a bike, and you can always hire one over here, but it's really nice to have the Giant sponsored bike, which is what we're used to riding.
Yeah, and it is a great TCR to climb the hills in, especially when a couple of days we've been doing 2,000 and 3,000 meters of climbing. And I must say, it wasn't really a minor crash, because your helmet was smashed in 3 different parts, and you probably had concussion, and you've got a couple of bikes have hit you in your leg. Some other bikes have hit you in your leg, your back, your hip, and your arm. So, you've come out of it pretty lucky, considering how bad it could have been. So, crash is bad enough, but your face was pretty much, you landed on your face, and don't want to downplay it, but it was a pretty major crash.
Sorry, I'll rephrase. When I said not much happened, I mean, my bike was smashed. My bike was completely written off, but the bike and the helmet took the brunt of everything, and I ended up just personally, my body was okay, which is the lucky part. The helmet was pretty messed up. But let's talk about this trip a little. We're in Italy. We've been here a week. We're having the absolute time of our lives, riding these monstrous climbs, switchbacks. You've been enjoying it?
Yeah, and one of the worries when you go to the Alps and when a lot of the climbing's above 2,000 metres, and look in Australia, I think Mount Kosciuszko is 2,200 metres, I think, 2,100, something like that. But so we've had several passes, as they call it, when you're climbing any of the major climbs, and we've been in the Alps for the first week, and some magnificent climbing there, and most people who've been there know the areas that I'm talking about, the Gavia and the Stelvio, two of the most iconic climbs that I've always wanted to climb, and we decided that we would do the Stelvio both sides, and that was one of the big epic days for both of us. And I don't think I've been so belittled in a long time. Coming up the 48 switchbacks on the return leg home, I think I stopped 7 times because I had full body cramp. I actually went into a pub and had a Coke and whatever they gave me, sandwiches or something. I was pretty delirious actually. It was quite a warm day, and we had separated because you were doing a bigger loop, and there was no way I was going to do that 7 days after COVID. So I decided to do the more conservative loop, but
quote unquote conservative, because
at 3,500 meters of climbing and doing the Stelvio both sides, I was pretty much on my knees, and I didn't actually think I was able to get to the top because I was probably only a K or two away. And when I got to the top, I fell off my bike, and a couple of people around me saying in Italian, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No." And I just reached in my pocket, handed my MasterCard and said Coke, and the guy went and got me a Coke, and I was lying on the ground. So that was my story. But then I recovered a bit, and I could watch you coming up from the view where I was, and you were doing a similar thing to what I was doing, which was stopping on a few of the corners and having a rest. And it was hilarious, but at the same time, it was a journey that I'll never forget. It was one of the hardest things I've done in a long time. And we both commented, like, if you don't prepare properly, and you hadn't done any endurance, and that's what you get when you're not prepared. And I probably was a bit sick still to be doing a long ride like that. And that's what happens. You end up in a bad way, and you actually can't do anything about it because you've got to get home. So somehow you've got to get up the top of that hill, and going down, felt like it took 10 minutes. It took 2 hours to get up there. But it was one of those great rides, perfect day. Hundreds of riders on the course, and it's not one of my best rides, but it's one of my most favourite rides I've ever done. I will never forget the experience I had, and very belittling and humbling, I reckon.
Humbling is the key word. It was extremely humbling and almost defeating, but at the same time, it was, no matter how tough it was getting, I was still laughing at how good it was. And there was certainly some dark periods where the second time at the climb, because it's 3,500 meters of climbing, 4.5 hours worth of climbing in terms of time, and it's not so much the time, but it's just the relentlessness of the steepness. It's the back half of the Stelvio is minimum 7%, so there's just no relief. That's normally on a climb, if it's 7 or 8%, it dips down to 4 or 5% every so often, but that back half is 8, 9, 10, 12%, and then the relief is 7%. And it's just, you're absolutely crawling up. And I got half an hour into the climb, the back way up. I don't know which is the front and back, but the second time, and I was full leg cramp, same as you. I was just a bit behind, and then I kept pushing through. And then the next 10 minutes, I'm going, no, I'm fully cramping here, adductors and everything, which is just the most uncomfortable thing to cramp on the bike. I pulled over and was holding onto the wall, trying to stretch because I didn't want to unclip, because I felt like once I unclipped, that would have been game over. And I thought, there is seriously, I was doing the maths, seriously 2 hours, 10 minutes left of climbing still. How am I going to get up? It's not, I'm struggling to pedal 100 meters right now. How am I going to pedal for another two plus hours? And it's not necessarily the difficulty of it. It was the underpreparedness, definitely. And it's an extremely difficult climb. For me, I've never been in a situation like that where I considered quitting, but there's no option because I can't go backwards because that's towards Switzerland. So the only way home is over the top of this climb. So I thought stopping's not really an option. I didn't even think to stop into a restaurant. Maybe that would have helped for half hour or something. And then the first time I stopped and got off the bike and just said, I just need to sit for 5 minutes. And I've never done that on a climb, and it's humbling because that felt like a really, I'm going, I'm not happy with myself here that I've actually stopped pedaling. But the further up the climb you got, you just saw everyone doing the same thing. You know, I barely saw anyone riding the whole thing, and I'm just laughing, going, "How the hell are the pros riding this at 5 watts per kilo at the end of a race, at the end of the Giro d'Italia?"
And I love the fact that we sit there and watch it on telly and go, "Why is he letting them go?
Yeah, why doesn't he attack? Yeah,
why can't he keep up?
Yeah,
well, we could barely pedal up at 4 k's an hour. These guys are doing 25 k's an hour, 30 k's an hour, and look." I know what you were going through because I was standing there watching you, and I just experienced it, and you were doing the same thing, and I was watching. I couldn't go down to help you because I wouldn't have got back up. And I don't know what I was going to do to help you anyway. Yeah. But it was sort of funny, and I felt so bad because I was just watching you creeping because you can see the last 10 turns.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was taking you forever to do that last K.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyway, when you got up the top, it was like. I did film it. It was
it's a pretty hilarious clip crawling up. But I describe it as I kept making concessions to myself. I kept saying, "Okay, it's the first time. It's okay to stop once." Okay, and then I said, "All right, I'll stop again. I'll stop again with 8K to go." You know, and then I got to 8K. And I went, "Okay, I'll stop again with 4K to go." And then I said, "I'll stop with 2K to go." And I kept doubling the amount of stops I was letting myself have. And it was also I was figuring out my threshold for where the cramp was happening, and so. At the start, I was pushing above 250 watts, and then this is a big lesson in being conservative. But then anytime I went over 250, I'd cramp, so I was sitting at 230, and then that threshold was getting lower and lower, and eventually by the end, if I went over 170, 180, I was cramping, and so I just had to pedal as carefully as possible and not push over 150, 160, 170 watts. Every time I did, the cramp twinge would happen. And
well, I started riding like the old style riders. I pushed myself as far back on the seat as possible.
Yeah.
So I was actually pushing that way because if I went to the normal position and pushed down, I just got full-blown cramp. So I just sat right back and it stopped the cramping, and it was the only way. And I was very disappointed in my performance because stopping is not really something that I like to do. Yeah. And here I could not care less about how many times I stopped. And it reminded me of, I've watched thousands of Ironman races and been in plenty myself and not had to have that experience of stopping and walking, and that underpreparedness really hit me of this is something I wouldn't want to experience, even though it was an epic day for us. It was really a bad experience in a lot of ways, and I think I learned a lot of lessons about preparedness and almost going above your level. In a certain situation, had we had our time again, we would probably not do the double. We would be a bit more conservative and do it some other way. But it was just too much on the one day, and that was just one day, and we climbed the Gavia, and that was just spectacular. And we had planned to go up there and back, and we got to the top, and your mum drove the car up there. We got up the top, it was snow everywhere and absolutely pelting down rain on us. And for anybody who's tried to descend, a climb like that at 0 degrees, it's not an enjoyable experience. So I had no hesitation in getting in the car and driving home that night. So and the next day we had to actually leave the Alps to go to the Dolomites, and we went back over the Gavia, and it had snowed. That's how much the weather had changed. The day before at Stelvio was brilliant, blue sky.
Yeah.
So in one day the weather had gone from 24 degrees to 0.
And in that next 24 hours, actually, the Stelvio and the Gavia all got snowed. The roads got snowed over, and so we were actually quite lucky that we did them those days because the roads would have been shut the day after. So
so what a great area the Alps was for those famous climbs, and there was other climbs that we didn't actually get to do. We didn't actually have enough time, which is a real pity. But we want to get here to the Dolomites, and what a different experience that is. And there's just thousands of climbs that you can be on. And we've met our good friend Tim Jamison, who's one of the long-time riders in our group and an ex-pro, and he's been on our podcast in episode
6 or something.
Yeah, something like one of the very first episodes. Who's a 58-year-old rider now who rode pro in Italy and in France, and knows a lot of these roads. Raced the Tour of the Alps as a pro, which is around here. or actually around Stelvio region and around here. And so riding with him this week's been fantastic, and such a knowledgeable guy about how to ride each day, and generally, we would be advocating to have spread out your riding so that you're getting the recovery you need and all those things. But there are times where, look, when you're in a period, you've only got a certain amount of days. You don't have to ride hard, but it's relentless riding every day. When each day we're climbing between 2,000 and 3,000 meters of climbing every day. Again, the preparedness thing. If we were doing this as a job and we're riding grand tours where it's 20 days of 3 weeks of riding to minimum 1,000 meters each day up to 4,000, your body would adapt to it. But we're not used to it, and it is so hard to back up the next day to climb the next hill. But you do, your legs seem to come good after
you adapt,
after a little bit of time. And as I said, we're not riding with any intensity. It's just riding around the hills and enjoying the unbelievable scenery.
It's no purposeful intensity, but you just the resistance on the hills is just relentless, and you're either riding up or down, and you just can't escape on it when it's 7, 8, 10%. We're riding zone 2, heart rate's in zone 2, but it's just the amount of meters climbed per day is, as you said, 2,000 to 3,000 meters average. It just wears your legs down all day. So even though it's zone 2, if we were scheduling this as a training program, we would just say this is far too much. But the fact is, we've got 9 available days to ride, and we want to make the most of them. And so we haven't been afraid to put ourselves into a bit of a hole. And today is the first optional rest day that we've chosen, just so we can enjoy the last few days of riding. And we've just had some really big days, coming from the Stelvio on Saturday. But we've had to make some decisions each day going far. I could have used a rest day 2 days ago, but there's too much good climbing to explore.
And you've got to match it with the weather too. So there's a few things happening. But I definitely prided myself over my years as being a good climber. And this is proving that I'm very far from a good climber at this present time, but I'm still descending very well. And funny when you look at Strava where you sit yourself on the climbs, and I'm well down in my categories, but I'm always at the top in the descent. So now I'm hanging my hat on. I'm a good descender. That's about all I can do very well.
You're not the best person to be trying to descend behind after you've had a bike crash. First ride back is in the Alps, and I stopped trying to follow you pretty quickly. Just descended a bit more carefully.
And Tim broke his collarbone, so he's descending gingerly as well.
Yeah, we had a pretty horrific descent yesterday where it poured on us up the climb, and wasn't too cold yesterday, which is a bit more bearable than when it's freezing conditions. But yeah, it's a cold descent back down, a cold and careful descent where you're just cruising around and don't want to risk slipping out. But look, one of my favorite things you said when talking about the preparedness was we got to the end of the Stelvio and you said, that was akin to an Ironman experience when you're underprepared. And as humbling as that was, I'm glad you said that because that made me feel better about how horrific the experience was. But we talk about that a lot on the podcast, where any event, whether it's 30 minutes long or 3 hours or 10 hours, when you're underprepared, it's just such a shocking feeling. It's a different kind of pain to if you're doing a 30-minute event or a 3-hour event or a 10-hour event that you're prepared for. You're going to experience pain in both of them, but the one you're prepared for, it's different. It's the intensity that you trained for, and it's you pushing yourself. Whereas you've got no choice in option B when you're not prepared. It's just suffering. It's just pure suffering, and you can't do anything about it.
You've lost control. I think that's the thing that I am disappointed with when I get to that situation. It hasn't happened a lot in my career, but I certainly had lost control of the day, and I was doing everything in my power and my capacity to get to the top of that hill, and it was took all of my willpower mentally and physically to actually get myself up that hill when I was completely done. And it's not a good feeling at all. You're at the mercy of whatever's happening around you, and somehow you miraculously get to the finish. And I see that when I watch almost, I call it the walk of death in the Ironman marathon. People have lost control. They can't run, and they're good athletes, but they're just not prepared well enough for that experience of what's going to happen on race day. And underprepare at your peril. That's what I think.
Yeah, you couldn't have put it any better. You're really proud of yourself for getting through it and getting to the end, but you're just not doing it in the way that you want to. And yeah, it's the same lesson that I wouldn't attack the Stelvio again like that. I wouldn't. If I wanted to do both days, I'd make sure I was more prepared for it so I could do it properly. And because we didn't override too hard the first climb, we rode solid and we rode within what our potential range was. It was just we rode well, I thought, but it's just the endurance of the actual day that we probably need to drop that back another 30 watts on the first climb.
Yep, you get your lessons handed to you on a silver platter very quickly. That's great. You learn from all your, when we do this podcast, it seems like we're experts and we've never made mistakes. It's actually the opposite. We're experts because we've made so many mistakes, and we're trying to stop people from copying the things that we do wrong. Yeah. And here's another example of, what a really day riddled with mistakes that we don't want others to replicate. And you learn a lot from those days, and it gives you perspective straight away about, I thought I was okay for that, but clearly I wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And speaking of, that's the topic of the episode is mistakes around power. And we kind of we always said to each other the other day, and that's why it's the title of this episode, is we're almost done with power. We're sick of some of the mistakes that we're seeing with it, or the misuse of it. And it's a bit of a sensationalist headline because we love power. And if you've listened to one single episode of this, let alone 50 or 100 or 200, you know that we're just all about power. We're power, power, power. We're so power focused, so much so that we won't let you join our coaching program without a power meter. But we want to get something really clear. We're seeing a lot of people take the use of power and rely on that as the most important piece of information and almost the sole piece of information as to whether something's good or not. And that is absolutely the wrong way to use power. And so we want to kind of go through right now what we're seeing and what's happening, and kind of just realign the thinking around power a little bit, just so you understand where it sits in the context of everything. A really cool example, and it's actually funny enough, the person we're riding with this whole trip, Tim, does not use power and couldn't care less for it, and is real old school riding and just loves it. And he's got such experience that when I'm sitting behind him and I'm looking at the power, it's remarkable how relatively even he rides without looking at any power or any data. But you can see the differences where he just uses his experience and rides a little bit differently. And someone else that just did it recently was Morton at the Unbound gravel. The biggest gravel race in the world. There's a really, really great photo of him winning in exceptional fashion. And if you haven't heard our episode with Lachlan Morton on the podcast, it was about 50 or 60 episodes ago. It was unbelievable. He just spoke to us in depth for 2 hours about his love for cycling, and to see him win that race was just awesome. And there's a really, really great photo of him, just dirt, sweat, blood, tears covering his face. He's just holding up his Garmin, and there's just one bit of data, or 2 bits of data. It's just time and average speed. Maybe I can't remember if there's anything else, but it's got 3-second power not available, average power not available, lap power not available. He's just got all. He's not paying. He did the whole 9.5 hours without looking at power. And so, while that's possible, we've explained for many reasons over the course of this podcast why that's not advised for 99.9% of age group athletes. But yeah, why don't you take us through kind of the trend that we've been seeing recently about people being too power focused?
That Lachlan Morton example, and there are other exceptions of every rule we have. There's always exceptions that are very successful, and that's something that we want to make sure that everybody hears us say loud and clear. There are some incredibly talented athletes who can get great outcomes without the use of power. But if it's an advantage, why wouldn't you actually use it? And I would say, he won that race, but he probably could have used the power for some advantage because he got dropped at some point where he had to make up time on the others, and he could have measured his effort a bit more with power. And at the end, people go, well, what are you talking about? He won. It doesn't matter, but it's the way, next time it might not be that position. You could use anything you want to use, nutrition, better bike equipment, power meters, heart rate, all those little things are going to contribute to the end result. And just because you win doesn't mean that's the perfect way to ride or train or to compete. And we've had a couple of podcasts where we've had people who just say they can race and train by feel. And unless you win every race, and and have never been defeated, then I'll actually agree that that's possible. But I haven't met anybody who hasn't been defeated in any race yet. And so they might win some races, but I'm thinking of one particular athlete who hasn't actually won a race but refuses to use power because they tell me that they're so in line with and in tune with their feelings that their body's giving them. They know what they're doing, but they're not being successful that way. And I would beg to differ. If they just had to add this one element, they actually might improve their results.
Yeah. I think we get so power focused because it's such a valuable piece of data, but we forget that the entire goal is to go from A to B as fast as possible. And so that is the marker of how successful that leg was, swim, bike, or run. And that's the metric that you kind of want to look at the end, but you don't want to focus that on as the execution. You use the power as the execution. And so we really want to make that distinction. And that's where a lot of people are getting mixed up, is they're basing their success on their power number, but it's just a metric, and these metrics can be wrong. And that's kind of the next point we want to go into.
Yeah, just before we talk about that, that is the key thing about using all the metrics that I just mentioned, like rate of perceived exertion, RPE, power meters, heart rate meters, lactate meters, temperature meters. These are all things that will help you make better decisions about how hard or how easy or to stay the same in your effort. So these are the things you should be always looking at when you're competing or training. All the time, asking yourself, what's this telling me? What's that telling me? What are those metrics telling me the whole time? And so at the end of the day, if you're getting all those pieces of information to you, then that's really the input that you're looking at. If I pedal like this or run like this or swim like this, that's the effort, that's the input. But the input is determining how quickly I get from A to B. In a swimming pool, 4 laps, how quickly can I do that? That's the result, the time. The average pace that I swim at will determine that. But it's how well I swim. What technique have I got? How's my kick? How's my stroke? That's the input part. And as a runner, the same thing. You're determined to run at an average pace. It's going to give you the result you want. That's the input. The result is what you average. And as a rider, I think people get confused. The power is the input, how much effort you're putting into the pedaling action. And as long as your aerodynamic and your bike and all that information is all accurate and as good as it can be, then the average speed that you ride will determine how fast you go. So we're trying to ride power into a headwind or with a tailwind, and that's where we get into the detail of why it's good to have a power meter, because it'll allow us to have a faster average speed from A to B. And at the end of the day, the result is based on how quick you ride, not how much power you do. How much power you do helps you ride quick.
And so this is where people get confused, because with swimming and running, the pace that you go equals the time. But that's not the same with power. And so for running, if you run 5-minute K pace, if you go slower, then it's a slower time. And so when you get to the end and the pace isn't what you wanted, then you're going to be disappointed, because it won't be the time you wanted. But if power is lower, you still might have ridden a similar time or faster time. And that's the difference that I don't think people necessarily understand. It's that riding the right power doesn't automatically equal faster. There's so many things that are happening. It's just power is one of the best metrics that you can use to control that input. But with running, for example, your pace is your pace, and that is what's going to result in your time. If you run slower, you run a slower time. If you run faster, it's fast time. But it's not the same with power. If you ride high power in sections, it could be the wrong section, or it could, there's a whole bunch of things which we talk about a lot.
The better example is if I was on a flat bit of road and there was no wind, if I decided that I wanted to ride 300 watts for 10 minutes, and the only way I could do that is to sit up high, and that way I get better leverage because my hip angle is low. And if I got in the time trial position, I can't do the 300 watts, but if I sit up, I can. But if I did 290 watts in the time trial position, I'm more likely going to beat myself who's sitting up doing 300 watts. So why would we be so infatuated by, I did 300 watts at 40 Ks an hour, but I did 290 watts in the TT position at 41 Ks an hour? I'm going to be happy with 390 as compared to 290 as compared to 300 watts, because the speed that I did is faster. So there's no value in me getting to an unaerodynamic position to push higher watts when I'm going to ride slower. That's the point we're trying to make. And the power, for yourself, when you're comparing yourself with yourself, is all determined by all those things I talked about. Your heart rate, the body temperature, your power meter, your aerodynamics, the technical advantage your bike has, the wheels, your position. All those things are important to make sure that you go from A to B quicker than the other guys. And if you're riding higher power and you ride slower, then are you happy with that? I'm certainly not. If I ride lower power and my speed's brilliant, I don't care what my power is. I do care, but it's not as important as me getting from A to B faster. That's my power today, but it was fast. Today was fast because of whatever reason my power meter was reading low. It could be a technical thing where, as we know in triathlon, if it sits in transition whilst you've, on the morning of the race, you would go to transition, set your bike up, get your power meter all sorted, get your Garmin all ready. And then you go and swim, and it could be literally an hour or 2 hours later from that 5 o'clock till the 7 o'clock start. The temperature has changed on the day from 5 degrees to 15. The power meter has a strain gauge, which is going to be expanding. So it could read 5% different by the time you get out of the water. So there are reasons why power, if you find out that it's reading low, then you can adapt your session based around, this is my new power for today, because that equals the speed that I normally do. If 300 watts normally equals 40 Ks an hour, and today I'm doing 40 Ks an hour, it's reading 270, fine, 270 is my number today. And we've talked about that before in many podcasts, but we're trying to explain it so that what I worry about is people at the end of the race. I've said this to many people. That's a magnificent ride today. That's the fastest you've ever ridden a 90K time trial or a 40K time trial in a triathlon or an individual time trial as a cyclist. You've ridden 43 Ks an hour or 40 Ks an hour or 36 Ks an hour. And I get the answer back, that was the worst power I've ever ridden. And I'm dumbfounded looking at them saying, are they taking the piss out of me, or are they really seriously upset that they rode lower power with a PB time trial? And that's the point I want to get across. Riding from A to B the fastest is the most important criteria that you should be looking at. And the fact that your power meter might read higher or lower is irrelevant because that's the input for the result. So I want to get that across, that you should be looking at how fast you've ridden in compared to the time on that course on any other time you've ridden that course. And whether your power's higher or lower, you could have changed power meters and they could read differently. It's the speed you do on that day. And if the day has got really bad weather conditions, that'll affect your speed as well. So, comparing yourself to perfectly calm conditions on the same course compared to really horrendous headwind, tailwind on the same course, there are reasons why you have to actually ride differently to get the same result or a better result. So just looking at power, and that's why the heading is what it is, we're done with power. We're done with power because people are so obsessed that that's more important than getting from A to B faster. And at the end of the day, I want people to stop thinking like that. I want them to think like, well, I just rode 43 Ks an hour, or I rode 36, and it's 4 Ks an hour better than I've ever done before. Don't be disappointed with that outcome because your power meter rode 10 watts lower. It's just not real. It's not relevant.
Yeah, we had a really great example from an athlete at Ironman Cairns last week who rode slightly lower power than they were expecting, but faster speed. It was half a kilometre or 0.7 kilometres an hour faster than the race-ready sessions and conditions they'd been practicing in. And his response was perfect. He said, I couldn't care if my power was 100 watts lower. I rode faster, and the fastest time I've done. And that is the perfect response. You could get to the end of your ride, and if you've ridden 2 minutes quicker than your last, what you're expecting, or your last time on that course, or what you normally do in training, your wattage could say 80 watts, and it doesn't matter. And funnily enough, Tim, who we just said we've been riding with, when if you ask him what watts did you ride today, he'll sarcastically say 8 watts, because he just couldn't get less. He said, I've got a big PB today, I rode 9 watts, and he's kind of taken the mickey that you don't have to rely on it. So look, we're jumping back and forth between saying power's really important, power's not important, and it's both are true.
Look, I want to clarify that after all I just said, training to power is super important to keep you in your ranges. And as long as the technology is working accurately, then you'll be training in the right zones, and you'll progress your improvement in fitness to get to your A race using power. That is the way to train. And if you don't have those opportunities, you're really guessing along the way. So yes, it's super important. Another key reason that the power meter is super important is at the start of any event, it will stop you from killing yourself for the rest of the day. If you take notice of what the power meter is saying, if it's reading properly, and just hold yourself back, because you're fresh, you're ready, you're feeling good. It's the start of an event. It's, 5K into 90K or 10K into 180K. Of course, the feeling is that it's too easy. And that's what you're trying to prevent. It's too easy, so I'll ride a bit harder. This is too easy, this first 10K. But you're tapered and you're well prepared for this one big day. So you throw all of the stuff that you've learnt in training out the window. I feel great. I'll just ride a little bit harder. That's what the power meter is there to stop you doing, as long as it's reading accurately. So no, I won't ride harder because I'm riding in the right range. This is the stuff I've ridden to all my training sessions. Why would I go above that number when I know if I do, in 80K's time or 130K time, I'll be riding way slower than I am now. So that's the value of the power meter, is to train accurately with it so you improve, and then on race day to stop you from blowing up. And at the end of the day, we don't ask you, how did you go today? What was your power? We asked you, how did you go? How fast did you ride? Was that close to your best speed? And then, oh, by the way, what was your power?
It's always a secondary question. Yeah. And it's just, and we just followed up with each one, and it's almost in order of how it was. Oh yeah, what was your heart rate then? How'd your heart rate go? And how did it feel? How hard was it? And were there any other factors to consider in the race? And so whenever you're talking to someone about their race, they're the questions we're asking to get the whole picture, and yeah, I guess we just want to stop people from just looking at the power. It's one tiny piece of the puzzle. At the end of the race, it's one tiny piece of the puzzle. In the whole build-up, in all the training, it's kind of the most important piece of the puzzle. It's the big thing you're focusing on in every training session, as well as speed, as well as heart rate, because as we've spoken about, you need all these metrics to keep working in conjunction with each other. But that is how the conversation goes, because once I've spoken to someone for a couple of minutes, then I can figure out, what the result kind of was. Especially, if the first thing they say is what's a PB on the bike, then, that's a brilliant start. But just off one question, like, what was your power? I can't tell if it was a good ride or not. They might say a certain number, but what did that actually mean? What did that result in for the race? And so that's why, this follow-up is so important. And it's I think that last point you made is the most important point, is that essentially the main priority of power in these races is to stop you going too hard. And it's really there to prevent you from overdoing it so that you can execute really well. And you basically, it's almost impossible to negative split without, being able to check your power or your pace on the run, because almost guarantee you're going to run or ride too hard at the start. And if you don't have something there to keep you back, then you make it very difficult for yourself to negative split.
Yeah, and if you imagine, I think of when you go 10-pin bowling, there's the lane, and the bumpers are on the side. The really experienced guys, they don't need the bumpers, but the young kids, when they're learning, without those bumpers, they're going all over the shop. And training and racing, it's the same. When you first start to use these metrics, you're going too low, you're going too high, just like in the bowling alley. You're hitting the bumpers. You need to stay in that lane and keep it as middle to the range as possible. And then once you start understanding the nuances of the day, the course, the uphills and downhills, the direction of the wind, they're the things that are going to make you slightly deviate to the left or to the right of that mid-range. And that's the thing that the power meter can do really well, is keep you in that range. And if you come to a hill and you don't actually take much notice of what the power meter is, how high it's going, you think that's okay, and you look down, you're actually 30 watts above where your range is. Keep doing that 5 or 6 times, and all of a sudden you're starting to burn more energy. You're spiking. The whole power number is going out of control, and therefore too many of those high bits, guess what happens? You start having to recover in the low bits. And that's what the power meter is going to stop you doing. It's going to make you have a much better outcome on the day, because it's keeping you in the lanes that you're well prepared for. And, if you want to have a blinder on any given day, go to the top of the range the whole day. Just don't keep spiking out of it. And, if you're feeling like you're struggling, go to the bottom of the range. You'll still have a good day. But if you think, I'll just snap over this hill really quick and get my speed up, and that'll help my average. Well, as soon as you do that, you've spiked, you've burnt energy, you've burnt nutrition, you've increased your heart rate, increased your lactate, and then you have to recover down the other side, which means the bike goes slow again. So you're actually going to go slower overall. So the reason we're really focusing on, and we're adamant that power is one of those things that we can't help you as a coach without. Because, I could ring you, Jordan, and say, I can't see any of the data. I'll say to you, how did you feel on today's session? And you'll go, I don't have a power meter, but I felt like I really rode really strong today. And I think I did all 8 efforts and I didn't fade. But we actually don't know whether you're in that range. It's not like as a runner where you could say, I'm doing 6 by 400 reps and I want to do 70 seconds for each 400. And you look at the watch and I did 70, 69, 70. You've got all this feedback. So you're getting this information. Without a power meter, you're just saying, I felt okay. And if I put that power meter and you didn't know you were doing it, and then we looked at your data, I guarantee your first efforts would be high and you would slowly get lower in your speed as you went through the efforts.
And look, you could do that on a velodrome. You could do 6 laps and time yourself each time and compare the time for each 6 laps. You could pick a course and do the same amount of time. But
and you can do, one effort on a hill. These are ways around it, which is what we used to do in the old days before we had power meter. And I know that hill on a bike is 5 minutes. And if I get to that hill in 4:58, and the next time I do it in 5:04, I know I've gone slower. I don't know what my power is, but I know that I've actually gone slower as long as the wind stayed the same.
And it's a trend we notice a lot in intervals is that, once again, people will potentially, let's say the interval, they have to average 270. They might average that, but if you looked at that interval, they spent the first 30 seconds at 310, 320, and they spent the last 90 seconds at 240. And that's a really poorly executed interval, even though they rode their average. And so they might actually, if it was just a time thing and they didn't have power, they might be getting the same time each time, but they're not riding it very well. They're not really practicing riding that even pacing. So that's another reason why it's important.
And look, as a triathlete or as a time trialist or as a marathon runner, you don't want to have variations all the time. The over-under type of racing is harder. And the guy who's really good or girl who's, on top of their form, they're the best athlete. If they want to destroy the other athletes, it's sometimes better to push hard and then recover and push hard because they're running within their limits. Whereas if they push hard and push the other athletes outside their limits, they're going to actually destroy them and make it an easier race for them. So there's times when it's okay to do that, but you're still going to risk it yourself. And we use Ingebrigtsen a lot. He never does that. He never goes out hard. He always steadily, progressively goes faster rather than the other way. So the power meter is doing that. It's helping you measure your effort, and that's all we're trying to say. It is crucially important to have it as a tool, but it's not you can't be defined by your number of power. And especially, we've got so many examples of some fantastic lady riders who their max 20-minute power is 160. That equals 40 k's an hour. And, we've got some brutally huge guys who can average 400 watts and their average is 38 k's an hour. I know who I'd rather be. I'd rather be 160 watts. So they're examples of the power is just a number, but it's a number that'll help you do a lot of things. But at the end of the day, it has to be taken in the context of what it's meant to be.
And so the only adjustment I'd make to your bowling analogy is that essentially we never take the bumpers off because the difference is the pros in the bowling, they'll eventually take the bumpers off. But the only context where someone would take the bumpers off in terms of power is maybe the Olympics in, the Olympic distance triathlon where, someone gets in a breakaway and it's just hell for leather and they just need to get away and it's time for them to go nuts. But even as you said,
a drafting race, that's a different race.
Yes.
If you're time trialing and you just go hell for leather, you're going above your ranges and you won't run well. The Brownlee brothers have proven that many times and they've won many times. They've won more than they've lost. But recently, they're just doing the same style that they used to when they were 10 years younger, and it's backfiring big time on them.
Yeah, I just mean there's circumstances where they're trying to do something that hasn't been done before, these world-class athletes, and therefore they might need to push higher power than they've ever pushed before. But again, they're just increasing the risk that they'll run worse, and that definitely happens a lot. And yeah, it happens a lot in the Ironman races or 70.3 races with the pros where they're trying a race where they're trying to break away. And
yeah, the pros are a little bit different, and a lot of our podcast is directed at age groupers, but there are exceptions with the pros who can just really smash out the ride and has minimal effect on their running because they're actually well prepared.
Yes, and they've trained that way as well, which is very different. So yeah, I mean that's the last point I want to make as well is the 400 watt versus 160 watt comparison you just made about very two different weighted athletes, and some people would argue that watts per kilo matters the most, but even then it can just be such an arbitrary number, and for me it just seems so insignificant to think about a wattage target, almost like I want to hit 300 watts, or I want to hit 400 watts, or I want to hit 5 watts per kilo, because you might be, and this has happened to plenty of athletes, and I laugh about it because it happened to me this week with a new bike, but brand new power meter. I actually have no idea what whether I haven't done a test on it, so I don't know if the watts I'm writing is that accurate to me or not. And so I could have spent all this time aiming for X wattage, and then I changed bikes, and then this power meter reads 30 watts lower, and it's like, well, now I'm never going to get there, because So
and that's happened to a lot of the athletes we coach where they've changed power meters, and the new power meter. I know Dave's been trying to ride 300 watts for 3 or 4 years, and he slowly was getting there 280, 290, and he's changed power meters, and the new one for the same speed and better speed, Dave can ride 44 k's an hour for a time trial, which is pretty special.
Yeah.
His new power meter for 44 k's an hour reads 260, 270, and he's just going, wow. But he knows that he's so happy that he's riding 44 k's an hour. That's the most important criteria to him. Yeah. But, that was a thing when he first started. I want to ride 300 watts. And so, 300's me 100. Yeah. It's 45 k's an hour as his target. And whatever power number it takes to get that, that's what you do.
Yeah. So we get it for sure. And it is really nice to chase the wattage. It's nice to chase those goals. It's nice we use those numbers for sure. But we're just saying that, be really careful with the way you use these. And we just notice a lot of people relying on it for some of the wrong reasons. And that's a big trend. We're very glad that a lot of people are on board with the powertrain now. It's across triathlon races. There is exceptionally more people using it now than 4 years ago and 2 years ago. But we wouldn't want people to be using it incorrectly.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the feedback that we get when we're at races, or people are really coming up to us and being so grateful for the information, and some people are emailing us and texting us, and they're highlighting the fact that their power is so much improved, of which we're really congratulating them for. But they've only heard half the story about the power meter, and that's the whole thing they're focusing on is, I did my PB at that race, but I was just a bit confused. My power was down. And there was a disappointment almost comment rather than, I smashed my PB. I'm so happy. Don't know what happened with the power meter. That's exactly how it should be. I'm super excited about what I just did, but my power meter was reading funny. Whereas they're coming from the opposite way. They're going, I'm not that happy. My power was down. Oh, yeah, but I did a PB.
That's as simple as we can say it. So we hope that we get that message across, and we're done with power being the only barometer for which you measure success. That's just not the way it's intended to be used. It's an input, as there are many inputs on the bike and in triathlon as a whole and in racing as a whole, and you've got to use each one smartly. So that's it for this episode. Thanks as always for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.